Good morning and welcome. This is Cheche, the show where opinion counts, live on Citizen TV. I'm your host, Udwa Kamimo. We're not sure how crowded this year's presidential contest will be, but what seems certain is that it will not be a two-horse race. Philip Murgor, a former director of public prosecutions and a lawyer, announced his intention to run for Kenya's top job at the end of 2016. He's our guest today. And because Charles Oziambo is back with us, we have our regular panelists, which includes Mutegi Njao. So good morning and welcome to the show. Mr. Murgor, what is the state of Kenya in your estimation?
First of all, I'm happy to be here again. I've been here before with both of you. And
5 years ago.
5 years ago.
Yeah, it's a long time.
And the discussion was, was the state of the nation? I think the state of the nation is far worse than it was 5 years ago. It's in critical need of help, and I don't think the current political actors, particularly Jubilee, can fix the problem that they themselves have caused. So we're in bad shape in every single area you look at. But of course the worst areas are tribalism and corruption, which we all know.
And so what would a President Murgor offer to Kenyans? How would you fix these problems?
If you look at all the problems, Udwak, all the problems facing this country, they all lead in some way or other to those two problems, tribalism and corruption. So what Kenya needs is a candidate and a president who's very firm, very committed to resolving those issues. A person who has never practiced tribalism, who doesn't represent tribalism, and who has never been corrupt and will fight and deal with corruption. Simply put, that is what we need.
You're telling us things that we've heard before, because everyone says that they will fight corruption, that they will offer leadership, they will fight tribalism. What are your specific interventions? What will you do specifically to eradicate these ills from the face of Kenya?
Can they be eradicated anyway?
Well, that's not the question for him.
First of all, Udwak, not many people say that. I would like to correct you. If you look at most of the actors, they don't even go there. On the issue of tribalism, quite a few of the members in the opposition simply accuse Jubilee of corruption or of tribalism, but don't commit to ending it. The same applies to corruption. So it's not everyone who dares go that way. All of them, or most of them, simply talk about it's our turn.
Well,
they have an approach of it's our turn, they've had it, they did it, and so on.
So that's disputable, but my question to you is, how would a President Murgor deal with these ails?
Let's deal with corruption first. I've been in the war against corruption as a director of public prosecutions, and I stuck my neck out. I did what I could, took as many cases as I could to court, but when it was inconvenient to the regime in power at the time, they showed me the door. So I came to the realization that it can only be fixed at one level, at the level of the presidency. As far as Jubilee is concerned, when the president says he's given up, game over. We should be having an election right now. The problem of corruption can only be fixed at the level of the presidency. How would I fix it? It's just what you represent, what you believe in. If you're a president that doesn't condone it, doesn't tolerate it, takes action as soon as it appears, and we're not talking about evidence and proof, as soon as, first of all, in the issue of appointments, if you're controversial or suspected to have acquired your fortune by way of corruption, you wouldn't serve. And if in the course of your duty it becomes apparent that you suddenly own half the street in Nairobi while being a minister of transport or any other such ministry, you cannot stay in government. And I've been in government. What happens is, once the boss doesn't tolerate something, in the first place it tends not to happen, but as soon as it happens, action is taken. So it's not about the science of fighting the cartels and how you prosecute, how you investigate. It's what you represent as the head of state. Tribalism, even simpler. the Constitution prescribes what your government should look like, which is it should reflect the face of Kenya. Start there. Practice it. Every single Kenyan or community should be represented before we get to the point where we begin to diminish the whole idea of who and what is your tribe, and finally get to Kenyans to thinking more about being Kenyan than simply representing their respective ethnic groups. So it's just a commitment. It's what you believe. It's what you believe in and how you will take it out.
Okay. Panelists, let's engage in some quick fire for President Murgor here. So that's ethnicity and tribalism. How would you deal with the current challenges we're facing? Number one, drought.
Drought. I'm a farmer, and I'm proud to say that, but a suffering farmer. Drought is as old as our history as a nation. We get a drought every so many years, sometimes up to 10, sometimes less. It's becoming more frequent. This is not an earthquake. It's not unexpected. By this time, any government should have had in place measures to take care of the effects of drought. You can't stop drought. We should have sufficient food reserves. Right now, the government immediately, as soon as this drought started, said they were going to import maize. What happened to the strategic grain reserve? Did it just disappear? Was it sold? Those are the questions.
Is that true? Did they say they're going to import maize?
Yes. The government has announced that it's going to import maize. It's actually said it's banned the exportation of maize, indicating that there is a shortage, rather than the fact that we have enough to last so many months. So the food, this is another thing that has gone on for years. Whenever there's a drought, there's too much food in one corner and no food in the other corner. By this time, we should have had measures to transport this food to those who suffer from the effects of drought before you start having these terrible pictures of Kenyans eating wild berries and being literally skin and bone. On water, we talk about water every day. We've got all these grand multi-billion shilling projects that we throw around so loosely, yet in many parts of this country there isn't a drop to drink. We see people leaning into the sand, drinking
dirty puddles of water
like their own livestock. It's so easy to solve those problems. Just commit the billions to the right projects.
The doctor's strike. How would you deal with that?
I'm very sympathetic with the doctors. Let me make that very clear. Why? I've been in government and I know what it takes to keep a professional who has choices in the public service. You must pay them a decent wage. In the case of the current doctors' strike, we have the famous, or whatever you'd call it, infamous CBA. It's a contract signed, sealed and delivered between the doctors' union and the ministry and the government of the day, which happens to be Jubilee. Don't trash it. Don't be legal or technical about it. Start there, because it's about how you trust your government. If the government signs a document or an agreement with you today and 2 years later says it's not worth the paper it's written on, then it diminishes the trust the citizens have in their government. So first things first, sit down with the doctors. If the government is broke, which is probably the problem, come up with an arrangement where you implement the CBA in stages. That's my recommendation.
Mutegi, you had a challenge for the CS for Treasury last week when we hosted him and we talked about the doctors' strike. So how would you, do you think that Philip Murgor's suggestion for the doctors' strike is workable?
The minister said, first of all, the CBA is not registered. Then he said they can't afford what is being asked for, but they have offered 40%. To me, Philip is not in government. He's my friend. The government says it has no money. The economy cannot support to pay that. So when Murgor becomes president, he will also find that sometimes You cannot afford even as government.
And as a lawyer, maybe just to together with that, whose responsibility is it to register the CBA?
That's where I'm reluctant to go.
Why?
The technical aspects of trying to get out of an agreement you've signed with your citizen or with your doctors, it shows dishonesty.
Is it a direct provision of the law that it has to be registered?
It is a requirement that at some point it must be registered and through the court.
So who should have done
that? I understand that the doctors have been trying to register it all this time, but it hasn't been possible. But coming back to what Mutegi is saying, if there's no money, what would President Murgor do? Come up with a staggered implementation of the same. But when you tear up...
The doctor will say, no, we don't want staggered, we want it now.
I have actually been quite close to the discussion, in the sense that I've actually been curious as to whether or not the doctors are totally unreasonable in this regard. And the signals I'm getting is that they are quite happy to have a staggered implementation of the CBA, provided it is not trashed. In other words, don't trash it and make us start from zero. Let us agree that this is what you agreed to pay us, this same Jubilee government, and let's discuss how you want to implement it. They're fairly sympathetic on the issue of whether or not funds are available at this time. But that's
so if the doctors could not register this, now we're calling on your expertise as a lawyer, if the doctors could not register the CBA, should the government have taken that up?
You know, Uduak, it's about trust.
Well, look, you want to head government.
What I'm saying is...
So how would you behave if you were heading a government? Doctors have been trying to register a CBA. What would you do, President Murgor?
I would actually really want to know who is supposed to register a CBA after it's been signed.
I think it's a mutual thing, because they're supposed to both go to court.
You think so? There is no provision?
There is an express provision. It's supposed to go through a court process. It's supposed to finally be registered by court. Now, what the doctors believe and feel is that here it is. You signed it with us. You should help us register it as soon as we can. When you turn around, go against the written word, what you put your pen to, and go against it, that's what led to the strike.
No, we understand all of that. I want to know what President Murgor would do. You have no money, you're broke, your government is broke.
You're over 40%.
Yeah, your courts, have been stalling, unwilling to register the CBO for whatever reason. What would President Murgor do?
Call the doctors to the table, sit down, discuss.
They've been at the table. It's a stalemate.
I'd be the one at the table. I would handle it differently.
Which the current president did in Mombasa some time back.
The one you're talking about is called Kenyatta. The one I'm talking about is called Philip Murgor. I would handle it differently.
How?
I would sit down with them and we'd come to an arrangement where it would be implemented in phases. That would be my offer, and I believe it would be accepted. If especially we all acknowledge that there is simply no money in the bank. That's the way out. Even we handle labor disputes every day in our offices. Somebody cannot insist on being paid what doesn't exist in terms of money in the bank. So it's a question of how to pay. That's the normal course when you have a contractual obligation which you can't. Even if judgment is entered against you, there is still a mitigation. Before the auctioneer comes and takes your goods, you can come up in court and say, this is how I'd like to implement the repayment plan.
Would President Murgor not realize that if you succumb to that kind of thing, many other professions will come and say, in fact the university students, the lecturers have said so, you've given the doctors 40%. We are paid less than the people we train. So we also want something. And they have gone on to strike on the basis of that increment. Now, what will the President Murgor do to stop that?
You're obviously talking about Philip Murgor inheriting a whole lot of problems. Which will be the case.
And which I'm sure you are aware of in this case.
There's an organization called the SRC, Salaries Review Commission. It is their responsibility to harmonize the salaries. And in that situation, the CBA should not have been signed in the first place. But it was signed. Having been signed, the doctors must be dealt with in a slightly different position. In the case of the university lecturers, they don't have a CBA. They want a CBA. The government, therefore, should be very careful about how it negotiates and puts pen to paper on that. But having said that, the lecturers' needs also should be listened to. Are they living beyond a certain basic minimum that they ought to live? Is it comparable to other jurisdictions? And so on. That's the discussion I'd have with them. Because you can't just keep saying no to these people, especially with the news that the government, through the president and his deputy, are perpetually, daily, by the minute, launching multi-billion shilling infrastructural projects. It's time to reflect. Are these projects standalone projects, or do they serve the citizenry, our people? Deal with the people's needs as you also deal with the infrastructural needs. There's too much focus on the fancy stuff, some of which may never get implemented at this stage because there's simply no money.
Give us examples.
All the roads that are being launched by the day.
We don't need roads?
No. The roads come up with the citizens. After all, after the roads are all up and done, the citizens are expected to use them. It's for the citizens, not the other way around. The roads, the citizens are the ones who require the roads.
Is there any citizen area? Is there an area where citizens have said we don't need the road?
I think in the current industrial unrest, that's what they are saying. Lipa kama tender, meaning put us in the equation, pay us something as well, if you have so much to spend. So I can tell you, these feelings on the ground are that perhaps you've gone too far with the roads and the other infrastructural projects.
So
pick up your citizens,
right. So
and take them to a certain level.
You're obviously then quite seized of the current challenges that Kenyans are facing.
Yes.
But in terms of ideology, therefore, what are you offering?
I think social democracy is the only way for a country like this. Always focus on the human aspect. Even as, it's a free market system, the government should always intervene to pick up the less fortunate and the less privileged.
That's an ODM thing. Social democracy, the philosophy of ODM.
You'll be surprised, it's everybody's thing. It's Jubilee's as well, but it's who will actually implement it and the spirit of it, rather than who simply gives lip service.
Talking of social democracy, one of the challenges, and Udwak was talking about current challenges, the issue of joblessness. If people who are working have issues with the money they are getting, a big number of Kenyans are jobless. How would President Murgor handle joblessness?
The one twin problem, remember? Corruption. The waste in corruption is phenomenal. Once you resolve the wastage through corruption and theft, there's far more available, first of all, to execute some of the public infrastructural projects. But then there is also enough for the government to spread around in areas that facilitate business, which in turn enables Kenyans to get employed. I'm now talking about things like if the government is chasing money in the markets, competing with the citizens for the same money, that pushes the interest rates up. When it pushes the interest rates up, the public can't afford to borrow, or alternatively, the banks prefer to give it to the government rather than the citizens, the sure borrower, the sure repayment, the repair. But they don't realize that governments also go belly up at some point. So just stop the borrowing, do less of the infrastructural development that appears to be the conduit through which most corruption is done today. Let the private sector grow, let the unemployed get absorbed, and you have a happier, stronger economy.
Is there anything you would give the Jubilee government credit for? Initially,
I was inclined to give them the benefit of doubt before I decided to run for president. One of the reasons that drove me to run for president is the fact that we were staring at imminent failure of the country. And I'm very serious about that, because you look at it yourselves. The tribalism levels and the corruption levels are such that come August the 8th, if we have a disputed election, when we have a 3.7 trillion shilling debt, which is almost or bordering on unsustainable, we're looking at Kenya becoming truly a failed state.
The Cabinet Secretary for Finance was here last week. He told us the borrowing is not unsustainable, They have always only borrowed for about 47, 49%.
40, yeah.
And they can borrow up to 70% according to World Bank figures and whatever. He said it is not true, that the borrowing is not sustainable. And he said, if you have evidence, give him.
I was looking at an article just before I came in, written in June, and the borrowing levels by June last year was that we were borrowing, or he, because he was here, let's talk about Mr. Rotich, was borrowing 700,000 a second. The public debt was rising at 40 billion, 30 billion.
Talking about gross figures, he was talking about percentages in proportion to GDP.
Yeah.
And at that time it was 40% of GDP. By the time he got here, it's 47.
And is allowed up to 70%.
Yeah.
Now, that presupposes certain things. It presupposes that you and I, our businesses are growing, and we are paying tax, the revenue base, that enables him to pay the loans. Very recently, an article was written about him requiring to borrow another 800 billion to pay a syndicated loan that comes due for payment.
No, he said that's not for paying loan, it is for development. He was here.
Call it for repaying the loan, call it for development. What does it show?
It's in
borrowing.
He said it's in budget and for development.
Shows borrowing upon borrowing. I haven't made the point regarding the revenue base. Businesses are shutting down. I think I even saw Royal Media laying off its workers. You don't lay off your workers unless you're beginning to feel the pinch. If Royal Media are doing less well, and so many other businesses, some of them relocating, the revenue base is going shrinking, the capacity to pay those loans. It's inversely proportional. You need to be growing, borrowing, while your economy is growing, your revenue base is increasing. His collections right now are at 1 trillion shillings, while the budget is 2.7, or is it 2.3 trillion. 1.3 is in the sky. He has to keep borrowing. So it's unsustainable. He has nothing else to say except that it's sustainable. But everybody else, all the papers have articles by experts, including the World Bank and IMF now, who are getting concerned. So it's time for us to also be concerned.
Talking about...
let's take a break.
I actually wanted to ask in relation to President Murgor. In an article...
he's still here. We'll take a break?
Yeah.
No, we'll come back.
Yeah,
we'll come back
to this issue, sorry. This is Cheche. We're live on Citizen TV. Today's guest is the presidential aspirant for the UDM Kenya party, Philip Murgor. You must have questions for him, so send them to us. Our question to you is this. Why would you vote for him? Why would you not vote for Philip Murgor? Our SMS number is 22422, and on Twitter you can find us using the hashtag Cheche.